Because apparently one of the big challenges that you guys have up there that we don't have at all is small hive beetle. How do you go with
Oh,
that?
it's a genetic thing. So it's a grooming trait, is what I find. They corral them very well. The local bee population, I guess you could say, deal with them fairly well. Um, they really do hunt and attack the beetles. So you can sort of look at the hive when you open the lid, and you'll usually see, the bees have corralled them into the corners of the frames. Or the way they work is anything that you don't have correct bee space in will have beetles in it. So if there's a little gap there that's not quite big enough for a bee to get in, the beetle will hide there, and then he will run out, and he will. There's a couple of things they do. They steal the eggs or the really tiny larvae out of the brood. So you can get peppery brood if you've got too many hive beetles in there, because they're running out, stealing the eggs and running back into their little crevice. um, but the best way we find to deal with them is just provide correct bee space. We don't use any traps or anything like that. As you can imagine, it just gets too big in a commercial operation to be checking traps or anything like that. But yeah, it really is genetics, but they only affect, I want to say, weak and dying hives. It's not something that you get a slime out in a big double. You know what I mean? It would have had to have abscond first. They're just like wax moths. Um, they clean up what's left. So
Hmm. Yeah. So do you have to, when it comes to pollen sub and stuff like that, do you have any issues there?
I never use pollen sub at all. I don't. Very. I think last year I finished using dry pollen sub, which is sort of preferred, I guess, over the wet. You don't want to be putting you don't want to be putting any pollen patties in the top of those hives, because they will be full of hive beetle in day. They'll be full of larvae in days. Like, if you were going to put it in, you'd only want to put a small quantity, and refeed it every couple of days, rather than putting in enough for a week, because that's not going to end up in your favour at all.
Hmm. And just for listeners here, Rockhampton, it's quite high in Australia. So it's in one of the northern states. And do you have a wet season there?
Um, yeah, it is it's subtropical or tropical. We're right on the Tropic of Capricorn, pretty much. Um, it is quite wet. That's what makes the hive beetle thrive as well, the wet. So it's they're particularly a problem. We don't tend to see them at all really over winter. Like, you might have a couple here and there in a hive. You'll see their population explode when we get the wet season and the warm temperatures. So once it hits about 30 degrees daytime temperature, which is pretty much the start of spring for us, those hive beetle populations start to explode, and they can give you grief. If you turn a frame around, and frames have convex and concave pieces all over them, and if you turn that frame around and then mush two convex pieces together, so there's not enough space in there for the bee to get between, the hive beetle will go in there and draw larvae very, very promptly before the bees can clean it out. So it really just does come down to being strict with your management practices, and making sure that you do allocate correct bee space, and you don't have frames hard up against the walls of your boxes. You actually need to have them off the wall of the box a little bit, so they've got enough bee space to keep the corners and the crevices in the boxes are the main challenge, if you know what I mean. Once you get the rest sort of spaced out correctly.
Mm. And because you're using plastic boxes, I guess that helps as well.
Well, they particularly love living in rotten parts of wooden boxes,
Mm.
if,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So anywhere where there's a crevice or a knot in the wood, all that sort of stuff, they huddle down in the corners. You'll quite often pull frames out of the side of the boxes, and the bees will have them all corralled into the corner. And there may be, 30 hive beetle all sort of stacked on top of each other in the corner, sort of like the Spartans. The Spartans used to do, they put all their shields up. Well, they all use their back, and the bees can't do anything when they're trying to get them and their back is against them. They actually have to get them when they're on the move and flip them over. And then um, I think they must just chew the legs off them. I do believe that this will help with varroa mites as well, because I think that from a bit of research I did, we're one of the countries that has actually got hive beetle first, and then varroa mites second, whereas it's usually the other way around. So I think they have a grooming trait that controls hive beetle, um, which hopefully will be that beneficial in other areas as well. Time will
Mm,
tell.
mm. All right, let's head to a listener question here. Um, Stimulating early brood production in spring. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I actually Bob Binney has a video on this on YouTube as well, but there's a bit of research that combines across a few areas that I use. So I use a bit of Doug Somerville's research, which is I like one of his famous quotes, which is why I don't feed pollen sub or anything anymore. So I don't know if this is exact to his words, but basically the supplementation of thin sucrose syrup in the stimulating fashion, which is similar to natural nectar, will increase the pollen foraging capacity of the hive. So I never feed pollen anymore. I just stimulate feed with a bit of thin sucrose. I tend to not feed anything at all anymore. I'm just a little bit large now to um, get around to all the hives to feed or do anything like that. So it's I have more of a I want to say I've bred um, a few lines of bees that bounce out of winter a lot better than others. So I sort of have a couple of lines of bees that I'm setting up now as well to go through. So they bounce they're very productive. They lay brood a lot. It's very viable brood.
It's like an
Um,
Italian type of trait, isn't it?
I'd like to say that, but they're generally not yellow. Um, they're um, there is some dark lines that do the exact same thing that I'm very fond of as well. That they just know it's spring, you know, and whether they are a line from, I believe one of them is a line from down Victoria Way as well. Um, I think it may be because they're used to that cold climate, and up here they just when they come up here they went, holy wow, let's go, you know. And it's like you hit that summer solstice, that winter solstice with some of them, and they just surprise you, you know. They chew out the frames of honey, and next minute you got 6 or 7 frames of brood in that bottom box, and that's enough to keep me going. I'm nearly at the point where I need to control my bee population.
Mm. Yeah, that Bob Binney video, he talks about different, I think I've seen that one. He talks about
Yeah,
different ratios of sugar syrup based on different
yeah,
times of the year, doesn't he?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Oh well, it's the amount of sugar to water ratio. So um it's the amount of sucrose in the mixture that actually stimulates brood production. So it was shown that basically, like, they talk about 2 to 1 and 1 to 1 a lot in the American thing, and I actually spent a bit of time researching this, which is totally, I don't know, maybe pointless, maybe not, but 1 kilo of sugar, white granulated sugar in volume in liquid, actually only equates to 600 mils. Um, that was one of the things that I actually worked out. So in a 2 liter bottle, if I added one kilo of sugar into it, I would have to add 1.4 kilos of sorry, I would have to add 1.4 liters of water, which would actually give you a 1.4 or a 1 to 1.4 ratio, which is the opposite of everything that everyone has ever spoken about when they talk about sugar syrup. Like, that's way too thin. But that research clearly shows, and I would back it. I really like the thin syrup for my I use it in the cells in the starters. Um, I really do like it for stimulating wax production. It really makes sure that your cells come out beautiful and big and white and clean, and you know, they just look beautiful. And I don't know, we're humans, aren't we? Like, as much as you know, as much as I would love to hate that pure yellow bee that just looks beautiful, I just can't hate it. I just can't with all my might. It just looks, it's pretty and it's beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it totally works in cell builders, that's for sure. I can
Yeah,
remember when I was first doing cell builders and I was really struggling and someone gave me the advice to use very thin sugar syrup, and I did it, and just bam, that made all the difference. And I went from getting sort of 10, 20% to 80, 90% just by changing that. I couldn't believe the change it made. Mm. Next question: how often does one replace a frame or foundation? Like, how often should you replace a frame or foundation?
The rule that I was always taught was to do your brood box every 3 years. So that's 3 to 4 frames. But I actually run a lot more through mine than that. So I do on my whole box at least once a year. Um,
Wow, that's
well,
often.
yeah, it is, but it just yeah, it's it's a very temperate climate up here, so um, it's very doable. Let's put it that way. Like I have no winter. I have my winter. What you shut down for, and you probably don't touch your bees for 6 months. I'm stacking boxes and pulling honey all winter, so it's a very different. Um, I'm trying to keep my bee population high in winter. It's sort of a different. It's a different thing. I actually have a problem where some bees will cluster down too much on me, and they won't actually make that honey flow, and that's sort of unproductive to have that type of bee around.
Why do you think it's good to do it that often?
Um, they do tell me it's to keep. I actually believe it's more to keep the pesticides and the what do they call them? Pesticides, fungicides, herbicides. I believe it's more for me. It's more about keeping them out and keeping a nice, fresh, healthy brood nest. Queens love old brood comb. There's no doubt about that. They they will lay old brood comb so beautifully. It's lovely. But yeah, I do like the. I run in a lot of residential areas as well. My bees aren't in what you'd think is a normal commercial setting, so I don't do any forests or anything like that. All my hives are on the edge of or in suburbia, so around the I would call it the retirement type. So 1 acre blocks or larger. So probably between 25 acres and half an acre are sort of the areas that my bees are all around. Like they're not in the middle of suburbia, but they're in that gardening, market gardening, semi-retired sort of area. So um, I believe that just because they're foraging those areas more, that people tend to use a bit more herbicides and fungicides and pesticides in those areas just to try to keep their fruit and veggies from being knocked around by the bugs.
Hmm. Okay. So let's just say, what do you think would be the absolute maximum that people should go before they change their frames over?
I don't like dark brood comb. I'm not a big fan of dark brood comb. I actually look at cell wall thickness is my biggest. So if I look at those cell walls and they've laid like honey frames, I believe can go forever. I don't think there's a problem with the honey frames or anything like that. They seem to, as long as they haven't got brood laid in them or anything like that, they seem to stay white for years and years that we've seen. But the brood combs, yeah, once I start seeing sort of that thickness, you can see a top on the cell wall. I tend to move that out into a nuke, and then as soon as I can, I get that on the side wall, and as soon as it's got a minimal amount of brood in it, it gets thrown over my shoulder, and she's gone.
Yeah, and you're
So
using foundation, are you?
I use a combination of everything. To tell you the truth, it's sort of what I can get my hands on at the moment. But I do prefer I prefer plastic foundation or full plastic frames in the honey supers. It's just easier. And once they're drawn in the honey super, and you've extracted them, put them back in as a sticky, and they've cleaned it out. Obviously, I follow strict barrier system. Frame of honey that gets extracted from that hive goes straight back into that hive as a sticky. It doesn't get put on another hive or anything like that. But yeah, as soon as they've cleaned that out, so usually the following week after we've extracted honey, that's when we go through and we do our brood assessments, and I ditch any dodgy frames that I've got and bring down hopefully a fresh, beautiful, fully drawn plastic foundation or full plastic frame back down into the brood nest. They just don't draw them properly in the brood nest if you put them in the brood nest to draw. So I sort of, yeah, they always leave that bottom, well, you'd be aware, they leave that bottom skirt, same as they do on a wax foundation. They won't draw it down to the bottom of the bar. But if you do it in the top box and then lower it, no dramas at all.
Yeah, cool. All right, next question here. How do you track the hive's progress over time? So what tracking method do you recommend? I mean, I know there's heaps of different methods out there. There's apps, there's, different
Yeah,
programs people use, books you can get. What do you think's the best?
I think as it gets bigger, you have to change. I know once upon a time we had a book, and I think we got to about 26 hives or something like that. It was just such a mess in a book. You just couldn't. You never knew when you were looking at a hive what the details were of it last time, and then you'd be traveling through the book to find it. And I've tried apps as well, and I've never had any good luck. I actually prefer oil-based black paint pens. The pigment in the black doesn't deteriorate in the sun. So if you use a coloured paint pen, it doesn't matter whether it's oil-based or whatever, the pigment will actually fade and you'll end up with a white because its base is white. A black paint pen, I've got hives there that have got the documentation still written on them from years ago. I actually write on the top of the Nucleus plastic lids in the gaps, and I just date it. We have all our own little codes. So CQCP would be a caged queen with a candy plug, and that means we installed her on that day with the date and it'll have lineage and stuff. M1FB would be -1 frame of brood or -1 frame of honey. On the back side, on the actual super that's allocated to that hive, we keep a record of it always gets a date and how many frames of honey we've pulled from that hive. So we try and keep it's never going to be super accurate like scales or anything, but a good record of, the production for that hive, because you don't want to be, well, not that you don't want to breed off something that's not productive. Some people want a different bee, but you want to know what each hive is doing, because you want to know what your plan is with that colony. I'll quite often, if she's doing quite well, my rule is 12 months that queen gets squashed, and I have absolutely no allegiance to that queen whatsoever. She just dies at 12 months. But if she has an extremely good honey production or something, I might give her the benefit of the doubt for a few more months until she starts to teeter off or something. But the black oil-based paint pen, and just developing a code that makes sense to yourself. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else, but and just it provides something. What I find is the best feature of it is when you go through that colony, you can you take the lid off. That's the first thing you're going to do to that colony, and you actually, as you're taking that lid off, you're reading what was done last time. Whether it's got a marked queen in it from last time or whatever, whatever you've written there, you can actually see it right there when you need it, rather than not knowing. That's what made us change to it, really, was just the fact that we needed to know what was in that box, how it was in there right now on the time, nice and simple, nice recording system that didn't deteriorate over the years. And that was, the black oil-based paint pen seemed to be the top notch. I tried Nico, but Nico doesn't work.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's interesting because there's a lot of different systems out there. I know some people use QR codes. There's some people use those cattle marking, cattle ear
Oh, yeah.
tags. You've seen
Yep.
that? They put the cattle ear tag into the actual box itself and read it like it's with the wand, the same way you do it with cattle. There's
Oh,
heaps of
wow. Yeah.
there's heaps of different systems. I mean, it works perfectly. The same way as it with a cow. You just sort of walk up with a wand, and how cows, they can sort of run past you pretty quickly. The wand picks it up quickly. It's the
Yeah.
same with a hive. You just sort of walk past and it pops up. But it's amazing considering that there's all those high-tech systems. Quite a few people still do that method, which is writing on top of the box. Michael Palmer does that, and if you've seen some of his videos, sometimes there's just heaps of information on top of the boxes. There's no space left. It's just
Yeah.
like, it's
Mine
good.
look like that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So it's amazing that there's all this tech out there and there's so many big beekeepers that still use that method.
Yeah,
It's
well, we
just
quite
so
often
handy.
Dad will go around when there's too much written on a box and it's run out of room, and he'll decide where the cutoff was, and he will water-based white paint straight over the top of what I've written on the box and say, "Yep, there you go, fresh start." Too much written on it, or because you might have changed the queen 6 months ago, so you don't need the last 18 months of information on top of it. And I've never been asked for information on any of my hives anyway. I think the record keeping aspect of beekeeping is whilst it's a sort of mandatory requirement, it's really in our benefit as a beekeeper for biosecurity measures. It To me, it doesn't have anywhere near the purpose that it does for me personally, knowing the lineage, the age of the queen, how many frames of honey she made last year, how many splits she did, like that's all the information that's valuable to us, isn't it?
Mm. No, absolutely. All right, let's have a look at the next question. How can you tell if your bees are robbing in a hive?
Mm. I have experienced once where I had an extremely good hive that had extremely good honey flow when no one else had good honey flow. Um, that's a very good way to tell if you've got one hive with extremely high performance compared to the others. They're quite likely to be Robbie. Other than that, I'm really.
It's interesting you should say that because I was talking to a friend of mine in Norway the other night, and we're talking about the difference between buckfast bees and some of the other bees they've got over there. And he said he got a buckfast queen once from someone to try it out, and he was surprised to find that it performed a lot better than all the other colonies in that apiary. And so he thought, "This is amazing." And he's just telling some of his friends about it, and, they were like, "Well, how do you know it's not robbing the other hives?" And he's like, "Oh, I'll go and check." And he went and had a look, and sure enough, he looked at all the bees were just flying straight into all the other colonies and robbing it out
Yeah,
and bringing it back.
yeah.
So,
And it's definitely not a trait that's beneficial to any of us. You know what I mean? It's the best way to get disease, in my opinion. So, um, I'd I'd like to say we all try and breed against it, don't we? But it's when it's in dearth, you can definitely see that some colonies they need some food, or they want some food, or they're more ambitious than the others. I'm not sure exactly what their caper is, but
yeah, oh, let's reverse the question then. How can you tell if your colony is getting robbed?
yeah, well, that would be f- for me, and we actually it's probably for us. It's probably more common to have a nuke robbed out than it is to have the hive beetle problem that we were talking about earlier. So, I would just because of probably the pressure in my commercial apiaries, because they run so many hives. Um, it's rare to see a slime out, but if you did see a colony that was low on numbers, it'd be getting robbed out. I actually had one the other day that I popped the lid off, and I immediately thought, "Oh, there's something wrong with that," and and immediately you could see the bees just popping up and just flying out of the colony, and not what do I want to say. They're abandoning the colony. They're leaving with their lunch,
Mhm.
um, and and any sort of frenzied activity. I know a few people get confused with orientation flights at the 2 p.m. mark. That's a very common confusance for new beekeepers, I would say, that are unaware of it. But the flight is very frenzied with robbing. It's I nearly want to say that it's more like a swarm frenzy when the bees are swarming. They're coming out of the hive very very fast. There's what would you say? There's purpose in their action rather than the orientation flight thing where there's you know we're just going for a leisurely stroll for a little bit. They sort of come out and they look around and then they jump off the landing board and go for a little bit of a fly around in the air and land back on the landing board. It's just a little bubble of bees. when they're robbing in our yard, it doesn't look like that. It looks pretty. It's intense.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, interesting. All right, well, thanks a lot for being on the show today, Paul. Really appreciate it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your business and where people can find you?
Yeah, so I'm the owner of Rockhampton Bees. Rockhamptonbees.com.au is the easiest way to find us. Yeah, primarily what we do is obviously honey production, but queen bees is my true love. I yeah, I love all the things with queen bees as you do, Brett. It's a what would you say? It's a rabbit hole you'll never get to the end of.
It's yeah, it's the least profitable part of beekeeping, but the most fun part.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's what yeah, and I do it. I think that I think that every beekeeper does it for the love because it is hard work. It's a tough industry. It's a not very. I wouldn't say it's a hugely profitable industry, but it seems to be one that has. I want to say a large percentage of happy people. The people within the beekeeping industry generally seem to be happy, and I want to say that they seem healthier too. I know it's improved my health, um, which that can only be beneficial to all of us, can't it? You know.
Hmm. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks a lot for being on the show. And I'll just say, if anyone listening would like to send in a question, just follow the show notes and you can send in a question. You can also leave a voice message there if you want to do that. I'll put all that in the show notes. And thanks again, Paul. And thanks and have a great day.
Good talking to you, Brent.